Luis, and again, it's an honor to present at this conference, and I'm really honored to have been asked. In the 10 minutes I'm given, I'm going to take you a little bit through the Legislative Assembly of Ontario's modernization process. I'm going to hit a couple of points. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about how our modernization process interacted with procedures and traditions of the Legislative Assembly of Ontario. And then a little bit of consideration, probably following on to what the previous conversation, the question and answer about the political environment and how that impacted our modernization process. And then finally, talk a little bit, because I am a lawyer, about the legal procedure. I will note that I am not as involved in the modernization as our Chief Information Technology Officer. What I hope to be able to provide to you today, to this conference today, is a legal perspective and a outsider's, a non-IT view on the modernization process and how things go. First, I'm going to start off with a little bit of situating where I sit within the Legislative Assembly and my experiences, because I think it's instructive to understanding how the modernization process in Ontario has gone. I joined the Assembly in 2015 after a stint as a litigation associate in a large national firm, and then also as a judicial law clerk at the Federal Court of Appeal. Which is to say that prior to joining the Assembly, I did not have to think all that much about technology. It was already set up for me in the firm and in the courts. Joining the Assembly was an eye-opener. I went from a law firm of 100 lawyers to a department of 2 that was only created the year before I was hired at the Assembly. So I came from an established environment to an environment that was new and unestablished, and the same with the technology that was involved. However, since I joined about a year and a half after the creation of the position, the knowledge management system was already being created and developed, and I was joined in the tail end of that particular process. All of which is to say, I'm not going to focus that much on the beginning of my time at the Assembly, because I'm going to jump to 2018. But I wanted to sort of stress the fact that the modernization process in Ontario occurred well before the 2018 timeline that I'm going to start off my presentation with. In 2018, the Legislative Assembly of Ontario created and published our first strategic plan for 2018 to 2022. It's the first time we've had that type of discipline to write a strategic plan. And within that plan, one of the focus that we had was information technology. Especially, the goal of information technology was to provide technology that aligns with and meets the evolving needs of Parliament. And so actually what that goal is twofold. It's to make sure that we both meet the needs of Parliament, parliamentarians, and Parliament staff currently, which is a question that is more susceptible to concrete answers. It's much easier for us to be able to say what we need now, but also to understand what we might need in the future, which is a more flexible and open discussion. As a non-IT goal within our strategic plan, we've also adopted the idea of open Parliament, to making Parliament much more transparent. Our website now is excellent and works very well. However, back in the day, before we had the revamped website, it was slightly difficult to find documents, even for me as an employee. Even 2 years in, it was slightly difficult. My web browser was full of little tabs and bookmarks because it was difficult to find the documents I needed. So I just bookmarked all of them. And so it was time for modernization. Once we found out and the strategic plan was established, they looked into, and this is moving on now to the procedure aspect. We started to take a look at how procedure and technology can work together. And actually, a lot of the times, the very strict procedures that we have as well as the very templates, documents, and languages that we use were very amicable to modernization and technological evolution, mostly because it was all just templates, and if we had specific motions or names, those were relatively easy to adjust. And so the first thing that we did was to create an electronic system for our committees, which we call Amherst. Before the Amherst program, most and everything that was done by hand. So committee agendas, committee minutes, committee journals and evidence was all documented within a Microsoft Word document. And the clerk of the committee or their assistant will have to literally type it in all by hand. There was also no ability for members of the public who were interested in participating or making deputations or testifying before a committee to register online. You still literally had to either pick up the phone and call the committee clerk in order to register to testify before a committee, or you're going to have to email us, and then it's a question of various emails in order to figure out whether or not time slots were available and how we can make these things work, which was not, I think we can all agree, a very effective way of dealing with this. When I say that procedure really helped, in that it only really helps because procedure in general is relatively consistent. In Ontario, we don't change our standing orders that much prior to 2018. But of course, as we all know, in 2020, COVID hit, and our procedures changed quite a lot. And that's sort of also where the technology really helped as well, not only from working from home, but also to make sure that we actually have a very thought through how procedures is going to work within our technological realm. And once that was done, we found it relatively easy to create committee meetings and committee reports. Following the success of our committee program, earlier this year, we launched a new system called MACE, which deals with the plenary or the House documents. So all of our orders, all of our votes and journals and all official House documents now goes through a computerized program in order to create that particular document, which again is a significant difference change from what we used to do, which was literally a Word document with little templates in it, and then a clerk will have to fill it all out in order to create the votes and the orders. What we found is that while the structure and vigor of technological modernization certainly helps us think through procedures, we've also found that at times we have created too much rigidity, and that certain events, for example, the demise of Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, sometimes raised problems in how we can actually create a document that looked like previous documents of the same issue. And of course, with the demise of the crown, the previous document was 71 years ago. And so it was slightly difficult to make sure that, the tributes that we gave for the late King George look the same as the tributes that we gave to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. I'm going to move a little bit on now to politics because I do want to talk a little bit about funding. As we progressed through the modernization, and we're now in our second strategic plan from 2022 to 2026, one of the things that we recognized was that it was difficult to plan necessarily, because it is sometimes difficult to understand whether or not you're going to get those resources for long-term projects like modernization. Changes within the government, for example, who's the government house leader, who's the minister responsible, who's the minister of finance, and the potential changes in actual government between the liberals and the conservatives raises always questions about how far we can plan. And so I think what we found is that things get less concrete as time goes on forward. It becomes more aspirational and less actionable as time goes further, just because we're not 100% sure what the political environment and what the funding environment might be like in the future. But that's a problem not a problem, but that's a challenge and obstacle and unknowable that I think all parliaments have. It's that, every term and changes in personnel and personalities in governments or opposition policies may impact how we deal with modernization. So we've learned to take a much more flexible approach. And what you'll find in our second strategic plan is broader statements instead of specific goals. And we found that that sort of helped us be a bit more flexible. And if COVID has taught us anything, it's that flexibility is key. I don't think I have that much time left, so I'm going to mention one last thing, which is from the legal point of view, and the question of the trade-offs between technology and the law. As senior parliamentary counsel, I'm the Assembly's chief lawyer, and a big part of my job is to think through the protections that parliamentary privilege grants our parliament. How do I, for example, protect any privileged documents that are in the cloud? We're a subnational jurisdiction. We're the biggest subnational jurisdiction in Canada. So we have quite a lot of the IT and the servers are located in Toronto, but there was no ability to guarantee that the documents would stay there. I could not realistically assert parliamentary privilege in another Ontario's privileges in another province. I certainly cannot assert parliamentary privilege if the document is stored in a server in the United States. And so how we consider and how you consider the trade-offs between the, quite frankly, necessity of storing documents in the cloud nowadays to work in an effective modern environment, and the trade-off of laws that were developed before the invention of computers is something to sort of think through. And it's a struggle, really, because we still don't really have that type of guidance from the courts. So I hope this is a relatively short presentation, and I'm hoping these hit various points that I've been asked, and I hope that this presentation has been of interest into the